The rain had just stopped. The cold night air hung heavy with the scent of wet asphalt and crushed leaves. Tyrone knelt in the middle of the cracked street, his knees pressing into the cold, unforgiving pavement. His hands covered his face, trembling as he tried to hold back the flood inside, tears he had been taught to bury deep, never to show. Men don't cry, his father used to say, his voice cold and hard like stone. Tyrone could still hear it clearly, a shadow lurking in the corners of his mind. Men hold it in. They don't break down. But right now, kneeling there, the words felt like a cruel joke. The weight in his chest was unbearable. "Daddy?" A small voice, fragile and unsure, pierced the night. He peeled his hands away, blinking through the tears. There she was, Amara, his little girl. Just 3 years old. Barefoot, her tiny feet dirty and cold against the damp pavement. Her oversized jacket hung loosely on her thin frame. Her eyes, wide and searching, met his. "I'm here, baby," Tyrone whispered, his voice raw and breaking. He reached out, pulling her close, wrapping his arms protectively around her fragile body. Amara nestled against his chest, her breath warm against his skin. She didn't say anything more. She didn't have to. She understood. She was scared, but she was holding on to him, the only thing she had left. Tyrone's mind raced, memories crashing over him like waves. Just days ago, they had a home, a small, modest apartment filled with laughter and love. His wife, Maya, vibrant and strong, always the heart of their family. Now all that was gone. Taken in an instant, torn away by an accident that left him alone with Amara. He could still hear her voice, soft and warm, calling his name before the silence swallowed her. The landlord's words echoed next, cold, cutting. "You're out. No more delays. Pack up and leave. And don't come back." Racism was the sharp edge beneath those words. Tyrone knew it. The way the landlord avoided looking at Amara, the way he clenched his fists as Tyrone pleaded for just one more day. No work. No money. No place to go. He had wandered the streets for hours, clutching Amara close, trying to hold himself together. Until now. Now, kneeling here, on this lonely street, everything inside him broke loose. A car passed, headlights sweeping over them. No one stopped. No one cared. Tyrone's fingers trembled as he brushed damp hair from Amara's forehead. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a quiet strength he didn't know she had. "We'll be okay," he said again, voice steadying. "We have to be." But how? How could he protect her when he felt so lost? When every step felt heavier than the last? He pulled her tighter. The night stretched on, dark and endless. He thought of his father, the man who had raised him with tough love and stricter rules. A man who never showed weakness, who believed showing pain was a sign of failure. "Real men don't cry," his father had said one cold morning years ago. "You're stronger than that." Tyrone had believed it then. He had tried so hard. But now, kneeling here, those words felt like chains. He remembered sitting on his father's porch as a boy, watching the world move around him while his father stared silently at the horizon. There was love in those moments, buried beneath a hard exterior, but Tyrone hadn't understood it then. His own pain felt so raw, so personal. He felt ashamed to cry, ashamed to break. But most of all, he felt terrified. For Amara. For their future. The sound of her small breath against his chest was a fragile anchor. She depended on him. He was her world now. Suddenly, the streetlight flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the empty road. Tyrone's heart tightened. They had nowhere to go. No one to turn to. He whispered a silent prayer, a hope for strength, for a way out. Amara looked up again, and he forced a smile. "We'll find a way," he promised her. "I swear." The night dragged on. Tyrone stayed on his knees, holding Amara close, fighting the dark thoughts creeping in. Memories of Maya came flooding back, her laughter, the way she would gently braid Amara's hair in the mornings, the warmth of their small family, a safe place filled with love. He remembered the day they lost everything. It started with a sudden call, the police informing him of the accident. His world shattered. Maya was gone. His heart tore apart. Then came the eviction, a final blow from a man who saw them not as people, but as problems. He had tried to fight it. Tried to find work to keep his family afloat. But the streets were cold and the world was colder. Now, with Amara in his arms and tears falling freely, Tyrone understood something he hadn't before. Strength wasn't the absence of pain. It was the courage to keep going despite it. He looked up at the sky, now clearing after the rain. The first stars began to show, tiny lights in the vast darkness. A new night had come. But so had a new chance. Tyrone sat on the edge of a broken bench in a deserted park, his hands wrapped tightly around a chipped coffee cup someone had left behind. The bitter liquid inside did little to warm him, but it kept his hands from trembling so violently. Amara sat beside him, silent, clutching a small rag doll with a faded dress. The morning sun was weak, filtered through a gray sky, casting pale light over empty swings that creaked in the cold wind. He watched his daughter's small fingers trace the worn fabric of the doll. It had been Maya's favorite toy when she was a child. Now it was Amara's. A fragile thread connecting the past to the present. Tyrone's mind drifted back. It was a warm afternoon, the sun casting golden light through the curtains of their tiny apartment. Maya was humming softly as she prepared dinner. Amara, just learning to walk, toddled around the living room, giggling with pure joy. Tyrone sat on the couch, tired from a long day but smiling as he watched his family. Maya caught his eye and smiled, a quiet moment of peace. "You okay?" she asked, coming over and resting her head on his shoulder. He nodded, trying to hold on to that feeling of normalcy. But beneath it, the shadows of the past lingered. His childhood had not been easy. Raised by a father who believed that showing pain was weakness, Tyrone had learned to bury his feelings deep. The man was a hard man, shaped by a world that had never been kind to black men like them. "Don't cry, Tyrone," his father said one evening after a fight with a school bully. "Men don't cry." Those words echoed in Tyrone's heart still. They had been like chains binding him tight. But Maya had changed that. She saw past his armor. She showed him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was courage. With her, he began to open up, to dream. Maya had been everything, fierce, kind, the heart of their family. After her death, a hollow silence filled the spaces she had once lit up. Tyrone felt lost, like a ship without a rudder. He remembered the night he found her, the sirens, the cold hands of strangers trying to help. He remembered Amara's cries, confused and scared. Since that night, the world had tilted on its axis. Everything he knew was gone. Now, sitting beside his daughter, he tried to hold those memories close, to keep them alive. Amara looked up at him, her eyes bright with trust. "Daddy," she whispered. He smiled, despite the ache inside. "We're going to be okay," he said. "I promise." But deep down, he wondered how to make that promise real. Outside, the wind rustled dry leaves. Tyrone's thoughts wandered to the landlord, the man who had forced them out with cold eyes and sharp words. His voice rang in Tyrone's ears, soaked in hatred and fear. "You don't belong here." It wasn't just about rent. It was about race, about power, about keeping people like Tyrone and Amara invisible. Tyrone clenched his fists. The fight was bigger than him now. He looked at Amara, the tiny life depending on him. "I'll find a way," he said quietly. He didn't know how yet, but he would try. For her. The shelter was crowded and noisy. Tyrone stood by the entrance, holding Amara close to his chest. The small room was filled with rows of hard metal cots, a few worn blankets, and the smell of damp clothes and stale air. Around them, strangers shuffled, some with wary eyes, others with tired faces etched by hardship. They had made it here just before nightfall, but the promise of shelter felt hollow. Tyrone scanned the room, looking for a place to settle. The shelter was a temporary refuge, but it wasn't home. It never would be. Amara yawned, her tiny fingers clutching the edge of his shirt. He felt the weight of responsibility like a heavy stone in his chest. "This will do for now," he whispered. "We'll rest, and tomorrow we'll figure it out." He set their few belongings, a small backpack with a couple of clothes, some worn books, and a picture of Maya, by the cot. As Amara curled up under a thin blanket, Tyrone's mind drifted to the walls they had left behind. Walls that weren't just bricks and mortar, but barriers built by fear and hate. The eviction notice had arrived on a cold morning, slipped under the door like a silent threat. "Pay up or leave," the landlord said, his voice laced with venom. "You don't belong here." Tyrone had tried to reason with him, pleaded for more time. But the man's eyes were hard, cold. The landlord saw not a family but a problem to be erased. "Get out by the end of the day," he barked. "And don't come back." That moment had shattered something inside Tyrone. The place they called home, the sanctuary Maya had worked so hard to make warm and safe, was gone. And with it, the last thread holding their world together. He remembered standing there, staring at the empty street outside their apartment window as Amara clung to his leg. "I don't want to leave," she had whispered. He swallowed the lump in his throat, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "We have to," he said. "But I promise we'll find a new place." Back in the shelter, Tyrone looked around. The walls were thin, the beds close. Privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford here. He felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt since Maya's death. Other families whispered among themselves, casting curious looks at him and Amara. He wondered what they saw, another man broken by life, or someone still fighting. His mind flashed to the memories of his father's stern face. "Men don't cry. Men don't break." But here, in the shelter, surrounded by strangers, Tyrone felt like the last thread holding his family together was fraying. Amara stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly. Tyrone brushed a stray curl from her face, his fingers trembling. "We'll be okay, baby," he whispered. "I'll keep you safe." The promise sounded hollow even to his own ears. But it was all he had. As night deepened, Tyrone found himself unable to sleep. His thoughts swirled around memories and fears. He thought about Maya, her laughter, her strength, the way she always believed in him. He thought about his father and the lessons that now felt like chains. And he thought about Amara, her innocent eyes, her fragile hands. Somewhere deep inside, a small flame burned, a fragile hope that he could find a way to rebuild. Morning light seeped weakly through the thin curtains of the shelter's dormitory room. Tyrone stirred awake, careful not to wake Amara, who lay curled beside him, breathing softly. He sat up slowly, his body aching from the hard cot and restless night. Outside, distant voices and the clang of metal doors echoed. The shelter was already alive with the bustle of people trying to hold on to their dignity amid hardship. Tyrone wrapped his jacket tighter around himself and rose, stepping quietly toward the small communal bathroom. His reflection in the cracked mirror showed the wear of sleepless nights and endless worry, dark circles under bloodshot eyes, a jaw clenched tight. As he washed his face, memories of Maya's laughter flooded his mind. She had been the light in his life, fierce and unyielding. They had dreamed of a future full of hope despite the world's weight. Now, the world pressed down on him harder than ever. Back in the dormitory, a woman in her 50s approached Tyrone with a gentle smile. Her name was Clara, a shelter volunteer who had seen many broken souls come and go. "You're doing good," she said softly, nodding toward Amara. "She's lucky to have you." Tyrone managed a weak smile. "Thank you." Clara hesitated, then added, "If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Sometimes sharing the burden makes it a little lighter. Tyrone nodded, grateful but unsure how to open the door he'd locked tight for years. Later that day, Tyrone stepped outside the shelter. The city was cold and unyielding, its streets indifferent to his pain. He clutched Amara's hand tightly, guiding her past strangers who avoided their gaze. They stopped by a small playground, a patch of faded colors and rusted swings. Amara's eyes brightened. She ran toward the slide, her laughter pure and fleeting. Tyrone watched her, a lump tightening in his throat. This little girl was all he had left. Her smile was the only light in a world growing darker. At the same time, inside his mind, Tyrone fought silent battles. Memories of his father's harsh words clashed with the new feelings Maya had awakened in him: tenderness, vulnerability, and fierce love. He recalled one night, long ago, when his father caught him crying after a bad day at school. "Men don't cry," the old man said, his voice cold but tired. But Tyrone remembered how Maya had held him, whispering, "It's okay to feel. It's okay to be scared." That memory gave him strength now. Days passed, and the search for work became urgent. Tyrone visited every nearby job center, every storefront with a help-wanted sign. But every door closed in his face. Sometimes, the rejection felt personal, the color of his skin, the weight of his past casting shadows on his future. He felt invisible, a ghost in a city that moved on without him. One evening, as he returned to the shelter, Tyrone found Amara asleep, clutching the rag doll Maya had given her. He sat beside her, brushing strands of hair from her forehead. "I promise, Amara," he whispered, voice cracking. "I'm going to find a way. We won't stay here forever." But the fear lingered, fear of failure, fear of losing the little family he had left. That night, Tyrone sat alone on the bench outside, staring at the stars obscured by city lights. He thought about his father, Maya, Amara, and the future that felt uncertain. For the first time in a long time, tears slipped down his cheeks. He wiped them away quickly, but the weight of years pressed on his chest. Men don't cry. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to break that silence. The morning after his tears, Tyrone woke with a heavy heart but a spark of resolve. He knew he couldn't afford to fall apart, not with Amara depending on him. Yet, inside, the pain was raw and constant, a weight pressing down relentlessly. He carefully dressed Amara, brushing her curls softly, whispering words of encouragement he hoped she understood. "We'll be okay, baby. I promise." They left the shelter early, the city streets cold and unwelcoming, but Tyrone kept his chin up. Today, he would try something different. He had noticed a flyer pinned to a lamppost near the job center, a community center seeking volunteers and temporary help. He figured maybe this was a way in, a foot in the door, a chance to rebuild. The community center was a small, aging building nestled between brick apartment blocks. Inside, children's laughter echoed from a playroom, mingling with the smell of paint and old books. Tyrone signed up for an orientation session and spoke with the coordinator, a warm woman named Miss Fields. We're glad to have you, she said kindly. It's not a paying job at first, but it's a start. Sometimes these opportunities lead to more. Tyrone nodded, swallowing pride. He needed to start somewhere. Amara spent the afternoon playing with other children, her laughter lifting Tyrone's spirits. Watching her, he felt a glimmer of hope flicker in the shadows of despair. But as evening fell, the old doubts crept back in. Could he really build a future from this fragile beginning? Could he ever provide the stability and love Maya had dreamed of for their family? That night, the weight of loneliness pressed harder. Tyrone sat on the edge of the cot, staring at the worn photograph of Maya they kept tucked in his wallet. He traced her smiling face with his thumb, feeling the sting of loss anew. I miss you, he whispered, voice breaking. I don't know how to do this without you. His fingers clenched the photo until it creased. The next day brought more challenges. Tyrone juggled his community center duties and job searches, often with little success. At times, the exhaustion was so fierce it felt unbearable. One afternoon, as he walked home from an interview that went nowhere, Amara's small hand slipped from his grip. Panic surged through him. Amara, he called, heart-pounding. She stopped briefly, then darted toward a nearby street. Tyrone chased after her, fear tightening his chest. Suddenly, a car screeched to a halt inches from where Amara stood frozen in the road. Tyrone lunged, grabbing her just in time. His heart hammered as tears streamed down his face. You scared me, he said, voice trembling. You have to stay close, baby. Amara looked up with wide eyes, and for a moment he saw the fragile innocence that kept him fighting. That night, Tyrone lay awake, haunted by the near tragedy. He realized how fragile their world was, how quickly everything could slip away. Yet, the brush with disaster ignited a fierce protective fire within him. He vowed to fight harder, not just to survive, but to give Amara a life filled with safety and love. Over the next weeks, small victories and setbacks marked their days. Tyrone's volunteer work gave him purpose, and slowly he began to connect with others who understood pain and hope in equal measure. Miss Fields became a steady presence, offering encouragement and practical help. She helped Tyrone draft resumes, prepare for interviews, and connect with local resources. One afternoon, as Tyrone sat in the community center's small kitchen, Miss Fields handed him a phone. There's a job opening at a nearby warehouse, she said. It's not glamorous, but it pays. And it's a start. Tyrone nodded, determination shining in his eyes. The journey was far from easy. Long hours, physical exhaustion, and the constant fear of losing what little they had tested Tyrone's limits. But each morning he rose with a stubborn hope. Amara's smile was his anchor. One evening, as he tucked Amara into bed, she whispered, Daddy, I love you. Her voice was small, but it filled the room with light. Tyrone choked back tears and kissed her forehead. I love you too, baby. More than anything. The first weeks at the warehouse were grueling. Tyrone woke before dawn, aching muscles reminding him of every lost night. His hands, once soft from office work, hardened against the cold metal and rough boxes. But with each passing day, the rhythm of labor became a strange comfort. The foreman, a grizzled man named Hank, wasn't easy to please. His eyes scrutinized Tyrone from the moment he stepped in. Tyrone felt the weight of unspoken judgments, some based on his race, others on the rough edges life had forced upon him. Keep up, rookie, Hank barked one morning as Tyrone struggled to lift a heavy crate. Tyrone gritted his teeth and nodded. He wasn't about to give Hank a reason to write him off. At home, things were different. Amara's laughter was the melody that brightened his long, dark days. Her small hand in his was a constant reminder of what he fought for. But nights were harder. The silence after Amara fell asleep pressed down on Tyrone, unraveling the careful walls he'd built. He often sat by the window, staring out at the city's flickering lights, memories swirling like ghosts. One evening, a knock at the shelter's door startled him. It was Clara, the volunteer who had once offered a kind word. I thought you might like some company, she said gently, holding a bag with food and warm clothes. Tyrone hesitated but welcomed her in. They sat together in the dim light, sharing stories, his pain, her losses. For the first time in months, Tyrone felt a flicker of connection beyond survival. But the shadow of his past never fully left. Sometimes, when the weight became unbearable, Tyrone found himself back on that road, on his knees, tears hidden behind clenched fists. Men don't cry, his father's voice echoed like a cruel refrain. Yet, Tyrone knew better now. Strength wasn't the absence of pain, it was the courage to face it. At work, small victories began to build. Hank's gruff nods became less rare. A few coworkers offered smiles or brief chats. Tyrone held onto these moments like precious stones in the rough. One afternoon, Tyrone's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Miss Fields. There's a community meeting tomorrow about housing support programs. You should come. Tyrone felt a spark of hope. Maybe the tides were beginning to turn. The meeting was held in a small, packed room. Faces of every age and background filled the space, each carrying their own stories of struggle. A city official spoke about new initiatives to help families like Tyrone's: affordable housing, job training, childcare support. Tyrone raised his hand, voice steady despite the knots in his stomach. My wife passed away recently. I'm trying to do right by my daughter. We've been homeless for months. A woman approached after the meeting, handing him a card. I run a housing program. Call me. We want to help. Back at the shelter, Tyrone held the card tightly. For the first time, the future felt a little less uncertain. He looked at Amara, her eyes wide with innocence and trust. We're going to find a home, he whispered. Days blended into weeks like faded watercolor stains, edges bleeding into one another. Tyrone and Amara clung to the fragile threads of their new routine. The alarm's shrill ring each morning was the cruel reminder that the fight for survival never ceased. Yet, each sunrise also carried a quiet promise of a day lived, a step forward. The small apartment, a modest box of chipped paint and creaky floors, became their sanctuary. It wasn't the mansion Tyrone once dreamed of, nor the stable home he'd hoped to provide for Maya and their daughter. But it was theirs, a place where Amara could sleep without the chill of winter biting through thin blankets, where Tyrone could lay his head knowing the ground beneath was solid, not concrete. He kept the keys to the apartment on a chain around his neck, close to his heart. It was strange how something so small could mean so much. Ms. Ramirez was a steady beacon in the shifting storm. Each meeting was more than paperwork, it was a lifeline. She didn't just shuffle papers or spout protocols. She listened. Truly listened. You're stronger than you think, Tyrone, she told him once, her voice calm but sure. And Amara, she's lucky to have you. Her words didn't erase the ache inside him, the hollow that Maya's absence had carved deep, but they helped fill the cracks with hope. That first night in the apartment was a quiet symphony of new beginnings. Tyrone laid Amara on a soft patchwork quilt he'd found at a thrift shop. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender and old stories. Amara's eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings, and Tyrone stayed awake, watching her. The city noises outside faded into a distant hum. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like an enemy but a gentle lullaby. Tyrone thought about Maya, her smile, the way she used to hum lullabies, the soft way she'd run her fingers through Amara's hair. He closed his eyes and let himself imagine that for a moment Maya was still there, watching over them. Yet, even in this haven, shadows lingered. Grief was not a visitor who came and left. It was a weight, a constant companion that twisted unexpectedly, a scent, a sound, a sudden quiet moment triggering a wave of sorrow. One afternoon, Tyrone sat at the small kitchen table, peeling a grapefruit. The bitter tang was a sharp contrast to the sweetness he craved. Amara toddled nearby, her chubby fingers clutching a worn teddy bear. Daddy, she said, looking up with big brown eyes, where's Mommy? Tyrone swallowed hard, his throat tightening. She's watching us from the stars, sweetheart, he said, forcing a smile. And she loves you very much. Amara nodded, accepting the answer, but Tyrone knew the questions would come again in ways harder to answer. The park was a beacon of light in their new world, a patch of green surrounded by gray buildings and cracked sidewalks. It was where Amara's laughter echoed, pure and unburdened. Tyrone watched her take tentative steps toward a group of children playing tag. Her fingers curled around his hand like a lifeline. Go on, he urged softly. They want to play with you. Amara's face scrunched in concentration, then slowly, a shy smile bloomed. She took a step forward. Tyrone felt a lump in his throat. This was progress, small, messy, but real. At work, Tyrone's days were still long and hard. He learned to carry heavy crates, to read the subtle moods of his coworkers, and to survive the subtle sting of prejudice that still lingered. Hank's bark had softened to grunts of approval, and one afternoon, when Tyrone stayed late to finish a shipment, a coworker named Dave clapped him on the shoulder. Keep it up, man. You're doing good. It wasn't much, but for Tyrone it was everything. Then came the call from Ms. Ramirez, news that felt like a lifeline thrown into a turbulent sea. There's a child care grant available, she said. It's for single parents trying to get back on their feet. I want to help you apply. Tyrone's hands trembled. For so long, he had been on the edge of despair, but now a flicker of light cut through the darkness. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you so much. Nights were still the hardest. The silence after Amara's soft breathing had faded into sleep was deafening. Tyrone often found himself staring at the ceiling, memories of Maya crashing through his mind like relentless waves. He remembered their wedding day, the warmth of her hand in his, her laughter ringing in the sunlight, promises made with trembling voices. The world they built together was gone. But the love they shared, he told himself, could never be taken. And so he held on to Amara, to memories, to hope. The morning light filtered weakly through the thin curtains, casting long, soft shadows across the worn wooden floor. Tyrone sat at the small kitchen table, fingers wrapped tightly around a chipped mug of black coffee. The bitterness matched the heaviness in his chest. Amara slept soundly in her crib nearby, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. The quiet moments like these were fragile gifts, reminders that, despite the chaos, life still carried on. Tyrone's phone buzzed sharply on the table. It was a text from Ms. Ramirez. The grant came through. We have funding for childcare starting next week. I'll send the paperwork today. He stared at the message, disbelief and relief warring inside him. For months, the fear of failing his daughter had felt like a suffocating fog. Now, a crack of light pierced through. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Tyrone juggled new appointments, paperwork, and sleepless nights filled with worry. But through it all, Amara remained his anchor. One afternoon, as he sat on a bench in the park watching her chase after a fluttering butterfly, he thought about the promise he made to Maya to protect their daughter no matter what. At work, Tyrone found himself more focused, driven. The small gestures of kindness from coworkers, once rare, began to multiply. Dave invited him to join a weekend barbecue, even Hank cracked a rare smile. "Keep your head up, man," Hank said gruffly. "You're doing better than you know." But the road wasn't easy. Late one evening, as Tyrone walked home under the cold glow of streetlights, a group of men jeered from the shadows. Words sharp, cruel, soaked in the bitter poison of racism cut through the night air. Tyrone quickened his pace, clutching Amara's hand tightly, the familiar sting of fear settling in his gut. "Daddy, why are those men yelling?" Amara's voice trembled. Tyrone knelt, forcing a calm he didn't feel. "Some people don't understand love," he said softly. "But we keep going anyway." That night, alone in the dark apartment after Amara had fallen asleep, Tyrone allowed himself to finally cry. He fell to his knees, hands covering his face, tears slipping through his fingers. His father's voice echoed in his memory, "Men don't cry." But tonight, Tyrone let the tears fall. Because sometimes survival meant breaking the silence. In the weeks that followed, Tyrone enrolled Amara in a nearby daycare supported by the grant. The first morning, he held her small hand tightly, whispered encouragements, then watched as she disappeared into a room full of strangers. His heart ached, but he knew it was the right step. He was building a future, one moment, one choice at a time. One evening, Ms. Ramirez visited with a folder full of paperwork and a warm smile. "You're making progress, Tyrone. I know it's hard, but you're not alone." Tyrone nodded, gratitude filling his chest. The journey ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, hope was a steady companion. The days grew warmer as spring edged into summer, but Tyrone's world remained tangled between shadows and fragile light. Every morning began with a ritual, waking early, preparing Amara's breakfast, dressing her in soft cotton clothes, and walking her to daycare. The routine was exhausting but steady, a thin lifeline in the storm that never quite passed. The apartment was small, the walls thin enough that Tyrone could hear the neighbors arguing late into the night. Sometimes Amara would stir from sleep, frightened by the noise. Tyrone would hold her close, rocking her gently until her breathing slowed and the fear faded. He hated feeling powerless, hated the constant tension that gripped him. But for Amara, he swallowed the fear, wrapped himself in resolve. At work, the warehouse hummed with activity. Tyrone's muscles ached from lifting heavy crates and moving pallets, but his mind was sharper than ever. He noticed every sideways glance, every whispered comment. The weight of unspoken judgments pressed down on him. There was the foreman, Mr. Stanton, who often muttered about those people taking jobs but kept his distance. Then there were coworkers who smiled politely but never invited Tyrone to lunch or after-work gatherings. Tyrone learned to carry the loneliness alongside the physical exhaustion. One afternoon, after a long shift, Tyrone stopped by the small corner store to buy milk and bread. The bell above the door jingled softly as he entered. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. As he waited in line, a man behind him muttered loud enough for others to hear, "They don't belong here, taking our jobs." The words hit like a punch. Tyrone's jaw clenched instinctively. He could feel the eyes of the other customers, some nodding in agreement, others looking away uncomfortably. The man's voice was rough, dripping with bitterness. Tyrone wanted to say something, to stand up, but the exhaustion held him silent. Outside, the summer sun was relentless. Tyrone carried the groceries home, each step heavy with exhaustion and resolve. The sidewalks were cracked and littered with fallen leaves and scraps of paper. The city moved around him, indifferent and unaware of the battles hidden beneath its surface. Inside the apartment, Amara waited with a bright smile, her innocence a balm to his weary soul. "Daddy, look," she exclaimed, holding up a crumpled drawing of a rainbow. "I made this for you." Tyrone knelt down, his heart breaking and healing all at once. "It's beautiful, baby girl. Just like you." He held the drawing gently, tracing the colors with a tired finger. For a moment, the weight in his chest lifted. The small handprints of hope and love gave him strength to face another day. That night, after Amara was asleep, Tyrone sat by the window looking out at the city lights. The street lamps flickered like distant stars, soft and cold. Memories of Maya filled the quiet room, her laugh, her gentle touch, the warmth that felt so far away now. He whispered to the darkness, "I'm still here, Maya. For her. For us." The promise felt fragile but real. The struggle was far from over. Bills piled up on the kitchen counter, their neat stacks mocking Tyrone's efforts. The apartment's leaky faucet dripped ceaselessly, a constant reminder of how little control he had. The landlord's calls grew more frequent, their tone harsher each time. "You're late on rent again," the landlord said coldly during their last conversation. "I can't keep letting this go." Tyrone swallowed hard, knowing eviction was looming. Yet, Tyrone found strength in small victories. Amara's first unsteady steps, wobbly but determined, filled the room with joyous laughter. The kindness of a neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, who offered a ride to work one rainy morning, saving him from a long, cold wait at the bus stop. A letter from Ms. Ramirez confirming additional financial support, a lifeline that made the impossible seem within reach. One evening, a knock at the door startled Tyrone. It was Dave, his coworker. "I heard about your situation," Dave said quietly, holding a bag of groceries. "If you ever need a hand, I'm here." Tyrone's throat tightened. The weight of isolation was still heavy, but moments like these, small acts of kindness, shone brighter than he could have imagined. They shared a quiet moment in the dimly lit hallway. For the first time in months, Tyrone felt a flicker of genuine connection. Despite the hardships, Tyrone clung to hope. His daughter's laughter, the memories of Maya, the small kindnesses, they built a fragile fortress around his heart. He was not alone. And for Amara, that was everything. The night was quiet, except for the soft breathing of Amara sleeping peacefully in her small bed. Tyrone sat beside her, his fingers gently tracing the outline of her tiny hand. The world outside seemed distant, a blur of noise and struggles, far from the sanctuary of this moment. He looked around their cramped apartment, worn and threadbare but filled with the fragile hope that had kept him going. Weeks had passed since Dave's unexpected kindness. Slowly, the small threads of support began to weave into a lifeline. The social worker assigned to their case, Ms. Ramirez, had worked tirelessly to connect Tyrone with resources, food assistance, housing aid, and counseling services. It wasn't a perfect solution. The apartment was still small and noisy. The rent was still a burden. But for the first time in months, Tyrone felt a sliver of light piercing the darkness. One morning, Tyrone woke early. Amara was already awake, her eyes bright with excitement. "Daddy, today's the day," she exclaimed, pulling at his sleeve. He smiled, though the exhaustion weighed heavily on his body. Today was the day he'd finally get an interview at a local community center, a chance at a better job, one that might mean stability for them both. At the interview, Tyrone's hands trembled slightly. The interviewer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked about his skills, his goals, and most importantly, his story. Tyrone spoke carefully, his voice steady but raw. "My wife, she passed last year," he said, swallowing hard. "Since then, it's just been me and my daughter. I'm trying to build a life for her, but it's been hard. I'm ready to work hard. I want to be there for her." The woman nodded, her gaze softening. "We understand. And we want to help." Back at the apartment, Amara waited, her small fingers counting the minutes. When Tyrone walked through the door, tired but hopeful, she ran into his arms. "Did you get the job?" He hugged her tight. "Not yet. But I did my best. And that's what matters." The days turned into weeks. Tyrone started working part-time at the community center, helping with after-school programs and outreach. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He and Amara found moments of joy amid the struggle, afternoons in the park, reading stories under the fading sun, quiet evenings filled with laughter. One evening, as they walked home from the park, Tyrone looked down at Amara. "You know," he said softly, "your mom was a strong woman. She believed in hope, in never giving up." Amara smiled, clutching his hand. "I'm strong like her, Daddy." Tyrone's heart ached with both sorrow and pride. Late at night, Tyrone sat alone, the weight of the past heavy on his shoulders. He thought about his father, the man who said men don't cry. Tyrone had held onto that for years, burying his pain deep inside. But now, looking at Amara sleeping peacefully, he understood something different. Strength wasn't about hiding tears. It was about feeling them, facing them, and still moving forward. The road ahead was still uncertain. There were no promises of easy days. But Tyrone knew one thing for sure. He would fight. For Amara. For the memory of Maya. For the chance to build a life filled with love no matter the obstacles. Tyrone and Amara stand hand in hand on a quiet street corner. The city's noise fades as they watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Tyrone whispers, "We'll be okay. I promise." Amara looks up, eyes full of trust. He smiles, tears finally slipping free down his cheeks. Because sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is to let himself feel.